You're not our real mother. You have no right to be here. Those words cut through me like a knife. I stood in the living room I had called home for 15 years, looking at the 5 children I had raised from babies. The same children now staring at me like I was a stranger. It had been 3 weeks since David's funeral, 3 weeks since I buried my husband, the man who brought me into this family when his kids were toddlers. I had been their mother in every way, changing diapers, kissing scraped knees, celebrating every milestone. But now I was nothing to them, just the woman who happened to marry their dad. "Pack your things," Michael, 23, said coldly. "We've talked to a lawyer. This house belongs to us now." I looked at faces I had loved for 15 years. Sarah, who I taught to drive, the twins, Emma and Ethan, little Lucy, who I held through nightmares. None would meet my eyes. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own home, stay with me. If my story touches you, please like and subscribe. I met David 15 years ago when I was 28, and he was a devastated widower struggling to raise 5 young children alone. His wife had died in a car accident 6 months earlier, leaving him completely overwhelmed and lost. Michael was 8, Sarah was 6, the twins, Emma and Ethan, were 4, and little Lucy had just turned 2. I was working as a kindergarten teacher at the time, and Lucy was in my class. Every day, David would arrive to pick her up looking exhausted and defeated. His clothes were wrinkled, Lucy's hair was never quite brushed properly, and I could see the weight of single parenthood crushing this gentle man who was trying to hold his family together. Lucy was often the last child to be picked up, and I started staying late to help her with her coat and backpack, making sure she had everything she needed. I began packing extra snacks when I noticed she sometimes came to school hungry, her lunch forgotten in the morning chaos. These small gestures grew into something more when David, with tears in his eyes, asked if I would consider babysitting on weekends. "I don't know what I'm doing, Rachel," he admitted one Friday evening as he dropped all 5 children off at my small apartment. "I'm failing them. They need a mother, and I don't know how to be both parents. I can barely keep up with the laundry, let alone help with homework or remember permission slips." That weekend changed everything. I fell in love with those children before I ever fell in love with David. Michael, serious beyond his years and fiercely protective of his younger siblings. Sarah, creative and sensitive, who would spend hours drawing pictures of her family. The twins, Emma and Ethan, full of boundless energy and mischief that could drive anyone crazy, but also fill a house with laughter. And sweet little Lucy, who would curl up in my lap during story time and fall asleep calling me Miss Rachel in her tiny voice. When David and I started dating 6 months later, the children were initially resistant and suspicious. They had already lost one mother, and they weren't ready to trust another woman with their hearts. I understood their hesitation completely and never pushed or tried to force a relationship. Instead, I simply continued to show up for them, to love them consistently, to be the stable, caring presence they desperately needed. I learned each child's favorite foods, their fears, their dreams. I discovered that Michael had nightmares about losing his father, too. That Sarah was being bullied at school for not having a real mother. That Emma was struggling with reading while Ethan was already advanced in math. And that Lucy still cried for her birth mother every night. Slowly, carefully, I began to fill the gaps in their lives. I helped Sarah with her art projects and stood up to the bullies at school. I worked with Emma on her reading while challenging Ethan with advanced math problems. I helped Lucy through her tears and gradually helped her feel safe enough to sleep through the night. I taught Michael that it was okay to be a kid sometimes, that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his 8-year-old shoulders. The proposal came 2 years later, on Christmas morning, with all 5 children gathered around the tree in David's living room. He got down on one knee in front of the fireplace and said, "Rachel, you've already been a mother to these children in every way that matters. Will you marry me and make it official? Will you help me raise these beautiful kids?" But it was 7-year-old Lucy who sealed the deal. She broke away from her siblings and threw her arms around my neck, whispering urgently in my ear, "Please say yes, Miss Rachel. We need you. We love you. Please be our mommy forever." I said yes through tears of overwhelming joy, believing with my whole heart that I was joining a family that would love me as fiercely as I loved them. I thought we were creating something unbreakable, a bond that would last forever. The wedding was small but perfect, held in David's backyard with all 5 children as our wedding party. Michael walked me down the aisle, Sarah was my maid of honor, the twins were ring bearers, and Lucy was the flower girl. In my vows, I promised not just to love David, but to love, protect, and cherish his children as if they were my own. Because to me, they already were my own. After the wedding, I officially adopted all 5 children, giving them my name and my complete devotion. I quit my teaching job to become a full-time mother, dedicating every moment of my life to creating a stable, loving home for our family. David's work as an engineer required long hours and frequent travel, so I became the constant in the children's lives, the one they could always count on to be there. I was the one who got up at 2 in the morning when they had bad dreams or stomach bugs. I was the one who helped with homework every night, attended every parent-teacher conference, organized elaborate birthday parties and holiday celebrations. I drove them to soccer practice, dance recitals, piano lessons, and friends' houses. I was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every triumph and disappointment. As the years passed, our family found its rhythm. The children began calling me Mom naturally, without being asked or encouraged. They introduced me to their friends and teachers as their mother. When people asked about their family, they included me without hesitation, as if I had always been there. I loved every moment of it. I loved the chaos of getting 5 kids ready for school every morning, the homework battles, the sibling rivalries, the family vacations where we needed 2 hotel rooms and a minivan. I loved watching them grow and change, celebrating their successes and supporting them through their failures. Michael grew into a responsible young man who still looked out for his siblings but learned to trust me to handle things. Sarah blossomed into a confident artist who won awards for her paintings. Emma overcame her reading struggles and became an honor student, while Ethan's math skills earned him a spot in advanced classes. Lucy grew from a scared toddler into a bright, happy child who rarely had nightmares anymore. I thought we had built something permanent and unshakable. I thought that 15 years of unconditional love, daily sacrifice, and unwavering commitment had earned me a place in this family that could never be taken away. I thought love was enough to make us real family, regardless of biology. I was devastatingly, heartbreakingly wrong. The first crack in my perfect family appeared when the children became teenagers. Suddenly, the fact that I wasn't their real mother began to matter in ways it never had before. During arguments, they would sometimes throw it in my face. "You're not my real mom. You can't tell me what to do." Each time it happened, David would intervene and remind them that I was their mother in every way that mattered, but the words still stung. I told myself it was just typical teenage rebellion, that they didn't really mean it. I convinced myself that our bond was strong enough to weather these storms. I never imagined that those casual, hurtful comments were a preview of what was to come. When David was diagnosed with cancer 3 years ago, I threw myself into caring for him while still managing the household and supporting the children through their own fear and grief. I drove him to every appointment, researched treatments, managed his medications, and held his hand through the worst moments. The children rallied around their father, and for a while we felt like a united family again. They seemed to appreciate everything I was doing, and I thought we had moved past the teenage drama. I thought David's illness had reminded them of how much we all meant to each other. But I was wrong about that too. David died on a Tuesday morning in March, with all of us gathered around his hospital bed. His last words to me were, "Thank you for loving my children, Rachel. Thank you for being the mother they needed." He squeezed my hand and whispered, "Take care of them." I promised him I would, never imagining that they wouldn't let me. The funeral was a blur of flowers, condolences, and tears. I stood beside the 5 children I had raised, accepting sympathy from friends and family who had known us as a complete family for 15 years. Everyone spoke to me as David's widow, as the children's mother, as the woman who had held this family together through tragedy and triumph. But something had changed in the days following David's death. The children had become distant, whispering among themselves when they thought I couldn't hear. They held private conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. I told myself it was grief, that they were processing their loss in their own way, that they needed time to adjust to life without their father. I was wrong. The first sign came when I tried to discuss funeral arrangements with them. I had assumed we would make these decisions together, as a family. Instead, Michael informed me that they had already met with the funeral director and made all the arrangements themselves. "We're his biological children," he said, his voice cold and formal. "We have the legal right to make these decisions." I was stunned. "Michael, I'm his wife. I'm your mother. We should be doing this together." "You're his widow," he corrected, "but you're not our mother. Not really." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, Emma, Ethan, and Lucy stood behind Michael, their faces set in expressions I had never seen before. They looked at me like I was an outsider, an intruder in their grief. "I don't understand," I whispered. "We're a family. We've been a family for 15 years. "You were Dad's wife," Sarah said, her voice trembling but determined. "That doesn't make you our family." I tried to reach out to them individually, thinking maybe they were just following Michael's lead, that the younger ones didn't really feel this way. But one by one, they each made it clear that I was no longer welcome in their inner circle. Emma, who I had helped through her reading struggles, who had cried in my arms when boys at school made fun of her, looked at me with cold eyes and said, "We need space to grieve our father. You're not part of that." Ethan, who I had driven to countless math competitions, who had hugged me tight when he won his first trophy, simply turned away when I tried to talk to him. And Lucy, my sweet Lucy, who I had rocked to sleep for years, who had called me Mommy until she was 12, wouldn't even look at me. The house became a war zone of silent treatment and cold shoulders. I would cook dinner, and they would eat in their rooms. I would try to start conversations, and they would respond with one-word answers or simply ignore me. I felt like a ghost haunting my own home, invisible and unwanted. I tried to understand their behavior. They had lost their father, the one person who had always defended my place in the family. Maybe they were angry at him for leaving them, and I was the easiest target for that anger. Maybe they were scared of losing anyone else, so they were pushing me away before I could leave them too. But as the days turned into weeks, their coldness only intensified. They began having family meetings that I wasn't invited to. They made plans for holidays and birthdays that didn't include me. They spoke about their future as if I wasn't part of it. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the funeral. I had been trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, continuing to cook and clean and take care of the house as I always had. But when I went to do laundry, I found that they had moved all of their clothes to a different part of the house, as if they couldn't bear to have their belongings mixed with mine. That evening, I gathered them all in the living room. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to find a way to bridge the growing chasm between us. "I know you're all grieving," I began, my voice shaking. "I'm grieving too. Dad was the love of my life, and losing him has been the hardest thing I've ever experienced. But we still have each other. We're still a family." Michael stood up, his face hard and unforgiving. "No, Rachel, we're not a family. We never were. You were Dad's wife, and now that he's gone, there's nothing connecting us to you." "That's not true," I protested. "I adopted you. I raised you. I love you." "You adopted us because Dad wanted you to," Sarah said. "But that was just paperwork. It doesn't make you our real mother. I may not have given birth to you, but I've been your mother in every way that matters," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I've loved you, cared for you, sacrificed for you. I've been there for every important moment of your lives. Because you had to be," Emma said cruelly. "Because Dad made you. But now he's gone, and we don't need you anymore." The words were like daggers to my heart. I looked at each of their faces, searching for any sign of the love I thought we had shared, any hint of the bond I believed we had built over 15 years. There was nothing. They looked at me with indifference at best, hostility at worst. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "This is my home. You're my children." "This was never your home," Michael said. "It was Dad's home, and now it's ours. And we're not your children. We never were." That night, I lay in the bed I had shared with David for 13 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had happened. The children I had loved unconditionally, the family I had devoted my life to, had rejected me completely. They had erased 15 years of love and sacrifice as if it had never happened. I thought about all the nights I had stayed up with them when they were sick, all the school events I had attended, all the tears I had dried and dreams I had encouraged. I thought about the way Lucy used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms, how Michael had asked my advice about girls, how Sarah had shown me every drawing she made, how the twins had competed for my attention and approval. Had any of it been real? Had they ever truly seen me as their mother? Or had I been deluding myself all these years? The silence in the house was deafening. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a family at peace, but the cold silence of strangers forced to share space. I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life, surrounded by people who had once been my whole world, but who now treated me like I was invisible. I realized that David's death hadn't just taken away my husband, it had taken away my entire identity. For 15 years, I had been Rachel, wife and mother, the woman who held this family together. Now I was just Rachel, the unwanted outsider who had overstayed her welcome. The grief was overwhelming, but it wasn't just grief for David. I was mourning the loss of my children, my family, my sense of belonging. I was mourning the death of the woman I had been and the future I had imagined. As I lay there in the darkness, I made a decision. I couldn't force them to love me. I couldn't make them see me as their mother if they had chosen not to. But I also couldn't continue to live in this house where I was treated like a stranger, where every day was a reminder of how little I had meant to the people I loved most. I would leave, not because I wanted to, but because staying was slowly killing me. I would find a way to rebuild my life, to rediscover who I was beyond being David's wife and their mother. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but it was the only one that would allow me to survive. The morning I decided to leave was gray and cold, matching the emptiness I felt inside. I had spent the night packing my belongings, 15 years of life reduced to a few suitcases and boxes. It was shocking how little actually belonged to me. Most of the furniture, the decorations, the memories embedded in every corner of the house, they all belonged to David's family, not to me. I moved quietly through the house, gathering my clothes, my books, the few personal items that were truly mine. The children were still asleep, and I was grateful for the silence. I couldn't bear another confrontation, another reminder that I was no longer wanted here. As I packed, I found myself pausing over certain items. The photo from our wedding day, where all 5 children stood around David and me, smiling and happy. The Mother's Day cards they had made for me over the years, filled with crayon drawings and declarations of love. The small gifts they had given me for birthdays and holidays, a ceramic mug that said "World's Best Mom," a handmade bracelet from Lucy, a framed picture of all of us at the beach. Had any of it been real? Or had they just been going through the motions, doing what David expected of them? I carefully placed these items in a separate box, unable to throw them away, but uncertain if I would ever be able to look at them again without feeling the sharp pain of rejection. By the time the children woke up, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my suitcases by the door. I had made coffee and breakfast, one last act of care for the family that no longer wanted me. Michael was the first to come downstairs. He stopped short when he saw my luggage, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe even regret. But it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think it's best for everyone." The other children filtered into the kitchen one by one, each of them taking in the scene with varying degrees of emotion. Sarah looked relieved. The twins seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. Lucy stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. "I've left my contact information on the refrigerator," I said, addressing all of them. "If you ever need anything, if there's ever an emergency, please don't hesitate to call me." "We won't need anything from you," Michael said, his voice cold. I nodded, having expected as much. "I've also left information about your father's life insurance policies, his retirement accounts, and other financial matters. You'll need to contact the lawyers and banks to transfer everything into your names." "We can handle our own affairs," Sarah said. "I know you can," I replied. "You're all adults now, or nearly so. You're capable and strong, and your father would be proud of the people you've become." I stood up, my legs shaky but determined. "I want you to know that loving you and raising you has been the greatest privilege of my life. I know you don't see me as your mother anymore, and I have to accept that. But I will always love you, and I will always be grateful for the years we had together." Lucy finally looked up, and I saw tears in her eyes. For a moment, I thought she might say something, might reach out to me. But Michael put his hand on her shoulder, and she looked away again. "I hope you'll be happy," I continued, my voice beginning to crack. "I hope you'll take care of each other, support each other, love each other the way your father would have wanted. And I hope someday you'll understand that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, commitment, and love." I picked up my suitcases and walked toward the door. No one moved to stop me. No one said goodbye. As I reached for the door handle, I heard a small voice behind me. "Rachel?" I turned around. It was Lucy, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But Michael's grip on her shoulder tightened, and I knew that any gesture from me would only make things harder for her. "I'm sorry too, sweetheart," I said softly. "Take care of yourself." And then I walked out the door of the house that had been my home for 15 years, closing it behind me with a quiet click that sounded like the end of everything I had ever known. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the house where I had lived and lost everything that mattered to me. I thought about the woman I had been when I first walked through that door, young, hopeful, ready to love and be loved. I thought about all the dreams I had built within those walls, all the memories that would forever be tainted by this ending. But I also thought about the woman I could become. For 15 years, I had defined myself entirely through my relationships with David and the children. I had been a wife and mother first, and everything else second. Now, for the first time since I was 28 years old, I was just Rachel. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I started the car and drove away without looking back. I had rented a small apartment across town, a one-bedroom place that was nothing like the spacious family home I was leaving behind. But it was mine, and that was something. The first few weeks in my new place were the loneliest of my life. I would wake up in the morning and for a split second forget where I was. I would reach for my phone to text one of the kids about their day, then remember that they didn't want to hear from me. I would cook dinner for one and sit at a table that felt too small and too quiet. But slowly, gradually, I began to adjust. I started taking long walks in the evenings, exploring neighborhoods I had never seen before. I visited the library and checked out books I had never had time to read when I was busy managing a household of 6. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never had the opportunity. The hardest part was the silence. After 15 years of constant noise, children laughing, arguing, asking questions, needing things, the quiet of my apartment felt oppressive. But I learned to fill it with music, with podcasts, with the sound of my own voice as I talked to myself while cooking or cleaning. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who helped me process the grief and rejection I was experiencing. She helped me understand that my worth wasn't tied to being needed by others, that I had value as an individual beyond my roles as wife and mother. "You've spent 15 years giving everything to other people," she said during one of our sessions. "Now it's time to give something to yourself." It was a foreign concept. I had been so focused on everyone else's needs for so long that I had forgotten I had needs of my own. I had dreams and interests and talents that had nothing to do with being a caregiver. Slowly, I began to rediscover who Rachel was when she wasn't defined by her relationships with others. I remembered that I had once loved to write, so I started keeping a journal. I remembered that I had been good at teaching, so I began volunteering as a tutor at the local elementary school. I remembered that I had always been drawn to helping others, so I started looking into ways I could make a difference in my community. The decision to let go wasn't a single moment. It was a process that took months. I had to let go of the fantasy that the children would realize their mistake and ask me to come home. I had to let go of the anger and resentment I felt toward them for rejecting me. I had to let go of the guilt I carried for somehow failing as a mother. Most importantly, I had to let go of the belief that my life was over because this chapter had ended. I was 43 years old, healthy, educated, and capable. I had decades of life ahead of me, and I could choose to spend them in bitterness and regret, or I could choose to build something new and meaningful. I chose to build. The process wasn't easy, and there were many days when I wanted to give up, to retreat into my grief and stay there forever. But Dr. Martinez reminded me that healing wasn't linear, that setbacks were part of the journey, and that every small step forward was a victory worth celebrating. 6 months after leaving the house, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to go back to school to get my master's degree in education. I was going to become a counselor who specialized in helping children and families navigate difficult transitions. I was going to turn my pain into purpose, my experience into expertise. It felt like the first truly selfish thing I had done in 15 years, and it felt wonderful. As I filled out the application forms, I realized that letting go hadn't meant giving up on love or family or connection. It had meant giving up on the specific version of those things that had caused me so much pain. I was opening myself up to new possibilities, new relationships, new ways of making a difference in the world. I was choosing myself, perhaps for the first time in my adult life. And while it was scary, it was also incredibly empowering. The woman who had been rejected by her stepchildren was gone. In her place was someone stronger, more self-aware, and more determined to create a life of meaning and purpose. I was ready to begin again. Starting over at 43 felt like learning to walk again after a devastating accident. Everything that had once felt natural and automatic, my daily routines, my sense of purpose, my identity, had to be consciously rebuilt from the ground up. But as terrifying as it was, there was also something liberating about having a blank slate, about being able to choose who I wanted to become, without the weight of other people's expectations. The master's program in counseling psychology was more challenging than I had anticipated. It had been over 20 years since I had been in a classroom as a student, and I felt intimidated by the younger students who seemed so confident and articulate. But my life experience, particularly my recent trauma, gave me insights that textbook knowledge alone couldn't provide. My professors and classmates were initially surprised by my story. Here was a woman who had devoted 15 years to raising children who weren't biologically hers, only to be rejected by them after their father's death. Some saw it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of step-families. Others saw it as evidence of the resilience of the human spirit. I saw it as both. My thesis focused on the psychological impact of ambiguous loss, the grief that comes from losing someone who is still alive but no longer accessible to you. It was a concept that perfectly described my relationship with the 5 children I had raised. They weren't dead, but they were lost to me just as surely as if they had died. The research was emotionally draining, but also therapeutic. I interviewed dozens of people who had experienced similar losses. Step-parents rejected by stepchildren, adoptive parents whose children sought out their biological families and never returned, foster parents who had loved children who were eventually reunified with their birth families. Their stories were heartbreaking but also inspiring, filled with examples of people who had found ways to rebuild their lives and rediscover their purpose. One interview in particular stayed with me. I spoke with a woman named Margaret who had raised her husband's 3 children from the time they were toddlers. When her husband died, the children, now adults, had cut her out of their lives completely. She had been devastated, much as I had been. I spent 2 years feeling sorry for myself, she told me. I was angry, bitter, convinced that my life was over. But then I realized something. I had loved those children unconditionally for 18 years. That love didn't disappear just because they rejected me. It was still part of who I was, and I could choose to let it make me bitter, or I could find other children who needed that love. Margaret had gone on to become a foster parent, providing temporary homes for children in crisis. She had fostered over 30 children in the 15 years since her stepchildren had rejected her, and several of them still considered her their mother. The children I raised may not have appreciated what I gave them, she said, but these foster children do. They understand what it means to be chosen, to be loved by someone who didn't have to love them. And that makes all the difference. Her words planted a seed in my mind that would eventually grow into something beautiful. As I progressed through my program, I began working part-time at a family counseling center, providing support to families in crisis. Many of my clients were dealing with blended family issues: step-parents struggling to connect with stepchildren, children torn between loyalty to biological parents and affection for step-parents, families trying to navigate the complex emotions that come with divorce and remarriage. I found that my personal experience, as painful as it had been, made me uniquely qualified to help these families. I understood the challenges from the inside, and I could offer hope to step-parents who felt like giving up. It's not about being perfect, I would tell them. It's about being consistent, patient, and loving, even when that love isn't returned. Sometimes the impact you have on a child's life doesn't become apparent until years later. Sometimes it never becomes apparent at all, but that doesn't mean it wasn't valuable. I also began facilitating support groups for step-parents, creating a safe space where people could share their struggles without judgment. These groups became some of the most meaningful work I had ever done. There was something powerful about bringing together people who had walked similar paths, who understood the unique challenges of loving children who might never fully accept them. One of my group members, a woman named Janet, had been struggling with her teenage stepdaughter for 3 years. The girl was hostile, disrespectful, and made it clear that she resented Janet's presence in her father's life. "I don't know why I keep trying," Janet said during one session, tears streaming down her face. "She hates me, and nothing I do makes any difference." "You keep trying because that's what love does," I told her. "Love doesn't give up just because it's not reciprocated. Love persists, even in the face of rejection, because love is about the giver, not the receiver." 6 months later, Janet's stepdaughter was diagnosed with a serious illness. During her treatment, she began to see Janet's consistent care and support in a new light. She eventually apologized for her behavior and thanked Janet for never giving up on her. Not every story had such a happy ending, but each one taught me something valuable about the nature of love, family, and resilience. My own healing continued throughout this period. I had started dating again, cautiously at first, but with growing confidence as I rediscovered who I was as an individual. I met a man named Robert at a conference on family therapy. He was a widower with grown children who lived across the country. He understood loss, and he appreciated the woman I had become through my struggles. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than desperate need or fear of being alone. For the first time in my adult life, I was in a relationship where I felt valued for who I was, not just for what I could do for someone else. I also reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during my years of intensive parenting. I made new friends through my work and my studies. I built a community of people who saw me as Rachel the counselor, Rachel the student, Rachel the friend, not just Rachel the stepmother who had been rejected. The financial aspect of rebuilding was challenging but manageable. David had left me a modest inheritance, and I had been careful with money throughout our marriage. I was able to support myself through school and the early years of my career without significant hardship. More importantly, I was building toward financial independence and professional fulfillment. As I approached graduation, I began to think about what came next. I could continue working at the family counseling center, perhaps eventually opening my own practice. I could pursue a doctorate and become a researcher or professor. I could write a book about my experiences and try to help other people navigate similar challenges. All of these options excited me, but there was one possibility that excited me most of all. I wanted to work with children who had been abandoned or rejected by their families. Children in foster care, children aging out of the system, children who needed to know that they were worthy of love, even if their biological families couldn't provide it. I thought about Margaret and her foster children, about the love she had been able to give and receive, even after being rejected by her stepchildren. I thought about all the children in the world who needed someone to choose them, to fight for them, to love them unconditionally. I realized that my experience with David's children, as painful as it had prepared me for this work in ways that no textbook ever could. I understood what it felt like to love children who weren't biologically mine. I understood the challenges and the rewards. I understood that love given freely, without expectation of return, was the purest form of love there was. As I walked across the stage to receive my master's degree, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. For the first time in 20 years, I had achieved something that had nothing to do with being a wife or mother. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and the woman I had become was stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than the woman I had been before. The children I had raised weren't there to see me graduate. They didn't know about my degree, my career, or the life I had built without them. Part of me still wished they could see how I had transformed my pain into purpose, but I no longer needed their validation to feel proud of what I had accomplished. I had learned to validate myself, to find worth in my own achievements, to build a life that was meaningful and fulfilling regardless of whether anyone else appreciated it. That night, as I celebrated with Robert and my new friends and colleagues, I raised a toast to new beginnings, to second chances, to the incredible resilience of the human heart. I had rebuilt myself from scratch, and the woman I had become was someone I was proud to be. 3 years after walking out of the house I had called home for 15 years, I stood in the doorway of my new office, reading the nameplate that still gave me a thrill. Dr. Rachel Martinez, licensed family therapist. I had taken Robert's name when we married the previous year, and while it had felt strange at first, I had come to love the symbolism of it. A new name for a new life, a fresh start built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. My practice specialized in blended families and children in foster care, and it had grown beyond my wildest expectations. Word had spread through the professional community about the therapist who truly understood the complexities of stepfamily dynamics, who could speak from personal experience about the challenges of loving children who might never love you back. The waiting room was filled with families in various stages of crisis and healing. There was the newly remarried couple struggling to blend their households, the teenage foster child who had been through 6 placements in 2 years, the stepmother who felt like giving up after months of rejection from her husband's children. Each client reminded me of my own journey, and I found deep satisfaction in being able to offer them hope based not just on professional training, but on lived experience. I could tell them honestly that it was possible to survive the rejection of children you loved, that it was possible to rebuild your life and find new purpose, that love given freely was never wasted, even if it wasn't returned. As I walked across the stage to receive my master's degree, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. For the first time in 20 years, I had achieved something that had nothing to do with being a wife or mother. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and the woman I had become was stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than the woman I had been before. The children I had raised weren't there to see me graduate. They didn't know about my degree, my career, or the life I had built without them. Part of me still wished they could see how I had transformed my pain into purpose, but I no longer needed their validation to feel proud of what I had accomplished. I had learned to validate myself, to find worth in my own achievements, to build a life that was meaningful and fulfilling regardless of whether anyone else appreciated it. That night, as I celebrated with Robert and my new friends and colleagues, I raised a toast to new beginnings, to second chances, to the incredible resilience of the human heart. I had rebuilt myself from scratch, and the woman I had become was someone I was proud to be. 3 years after walking out of the house I had called home for 15 years, I stood in the doorway of my new office, reading the nameplate that still gave me a thrill. Dr. Rachel Martinez, licensed family therapist. I had taken Robert's name when we married the previous year, and while it had felt strange at first, I had come to love the symbolism of it. A new name for a new life, a fresh start built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. My practice specialized in blended families and children in foster care, and it had grown beyond my wildest expectations. Word had spread through the professional community about the therapist who truly understood the complexities of step-family dynamics, who could speak from personal experience about the challenges of loving children who might never love you back. The waiting room was filled with families in various stages of crisis and healing. There was the newly remarried couple struggling to blend their households, the teenage foster child who had been through 6 placements in 2 years, the stepmother who felt like giving up after months of rejection from her husband's children. Each client reminded me of my own journey, and I found deep satisfaction in being able to offer them hope, not just on professional training, but on lived experience. I could tell them honestly that it was possible to survive the rejection of children you loved, that it was possible to rebuild your life and find new purpose, that love given freely was never wasted, even if it wasn't returned. My book, Chosen Family: A Stepmother's Journey from Rejection to Renewal, had been published 6 months earlier and was already in its 3rd printing. The response had been overwhelming. Emails from step-parents around the world who felt seen and understood for the first time, invitations to speak at conferences and workshops, requests for interviews from magazines and podcasts. The book tour had been emotionally challenging, but ultimately healing. Standing in front of audiences of hundreds of people, sharing my story of loss and renewal, I felt like I was finally able to transform my pain into something meaningful. Every person who approached me afterward to say that my story had given them hope made the years of struggle feel worthwhile. Robert had been incredibly supportive throughout this process. Unlike David, who had loved me but had never fully understood my need for individual purpose, Robert celebrated my professional success and encouraged my ambitions. He was secure enough in himself and in our relationship to be proud of my achievements rather than threatened by them. Our marriage was different from my first one in every way. We were both older, more self-aware, more clear about what we wanted and needed from a partnership. We had both experienced loss and knew how precious love was. We chose each other every day, not out of need or desperation, but out of genuine appreciation for who we were as individuals. Robert's children, now in their 30s and living their own lives, had welcomed me warmly. They understood that I wasn't trying to replace their mother, who had died 5 years earlier, but rather to love their father and support him in this new phase of his life. The contrast with my experience with David's children was stark and healing. I had also become involved in foster care advocacy, serving on the board of a local organization that worked to improve outcomes for children in the system. This work felt like a natural extension of everything I had learned about loving children who weren't biologically mine, about the importance of stability and consistency in a child's life. Through this work, I had met dozens of foster parents who were doing the difficult, often thankless work of providing homes for children in crisis. Many of them struggled with the same issues I had faced, loving children who might never love them back, dealing with the complexities of attachment and trauma, finding ways to maintain hope in the face of repeated disappointments. I had started a support group specifically for foster parents, and it had become one of the most rewarding aspects of my work. These parents understood what it meant to love unconditionally, to open your heart to children who had been hurt by the adults who were supposed to protect them, to provide stability and care without any guarantee of gratitude or affection in return. One of my foster parent support group members, a woman named Carol, had taken in 3 siblings who had been removed from their home due to severe neglect. The children were angry, traumatized, and resistant to any form of affection or care. They had been in Carol's home for 8 months, and she was exhausted and discouraged. "I don't think I'm making any difference," she told the group one evening. "They still flinch when I try to hug them. They still hoard food in their rooms. They still act like they're waiting for me to hurt them or abandon them." "You are making a difference," I assured her. "Every day that you show up, every meal you provide, every time you stay calm when they test your limits, you're showing them what safety looks like. You're teaching them that adults can be trustworthy. It may take months or even years for them to believe it, but you're planting seeds that will grow." 6 months later, Carol called me in tears. The youngest of the 3 children, a 6-year-old girl who had never spoken above a whisper, had crawled into Carol's lap during a thunderstorm and called her mama for the first time. "You were right," Carol said. "The seeds were growing all along. I just couldn't see it." These moments reminded me why my own experience, as painful as it had been necessary. I couldn't have helped these families with the same depth of understanding if I hadn't walked through my own valley of rejection and emerged on the other side. My relationship with David's children remained non-existent. I had sent each of them a copy of my book when it was published, along with a letter explaining that I wasn't trying to intrude on their lives, but wanted them to understand my perspective on our shared history. I had received no responses, and I no longer expected any. The grief over losing them had evolved into something more manageable, a quiet sadness that I carried with me, but that no longer dominated my life. I had learned to hold space for both the love I still felt for them and the acceptance that they might never be part of my life again. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, had helped me understand that this was a form of ambiguous loss, grieving people who were still alive but no longer accessible to me. She had taught me that it was possible to love someone and let them go at the same time, to honor the relationship we had while accepting the relationship we would never have. On particularly difficult days, when I missed them with an intensity that took my breath away, I would remind myself of all the good that had come from my experience. The clients I had helped, the foster families I supported, the book that had touched so many lives. None of it would have been possible without the pain that had driven me to rebuild my life. I had learned that meaning could be made from even the most devastating experiences, that purpose could be found in the midst of profound loss, that it was possible to transform rejection into resilience. My new life wasn't perfect, but it was authentically mine. I had built it from the ground up, based on my own values and dreams rather than other people's expectations. I had learned to find worth in my own achievements, to seek validation from within rather than from others, to create a family of choice that appreciated and supported me. As I prepared for my next client, a stepfather struggling to connect with his wife's teenage son, I reflected on how far I had traveled from the broken woman who had packed her bags and left the only home she had known for 15 years. That woman had believed her life was over when her stepchildren rejected her. This woman knew that rejection had been the beginning of something beautiful, a new chapter filled with purpose, love, and the deep satisfaction that comes from turning your wounds into wisdom. I was no longer defined by the children who had chosen not to love me. I was defined by the children I had chosen to help, the families I had supported, the life I had built through my own determination and resilience. This was my new beginning, and it was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined when I was in the depths of my despair. 5 years had passed since I walked out of the house on Maple Street, and I had built a life I never could have imagined during those dark months of rejection and grief. My practice was thriving, my marriage to Robert was strong, and I had found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or affection. I was leaving my office on a Tuesday evening, looking forward to dinner with Robert and a quiet evening at home, when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the bench outside my building.
At first, I thought I was imagining things. It had been so long, and I had trained myself not to look for them in crowds or hope for unexpected encounters. But as I got closer, there was no mistaking the young woman sitting there, nervously fidgeting with her purse strap. It was Lucy, now 22 years old, but still recognizable as the little girl I had once rocked to sleep
and comforted 30-40s who know how pain hides in silence. She looked up as I approached, and I saw that she had been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked thinner than I remembered, worn down by whatever had brought her to my doorstep after 5 years of silence. "Hello, Rachel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lucy," I replied, my heart pounding. I fought the urge to rush to her, to gather her in my arms the way I would have when she was small. Instead, I maintained my composure, the professional demeanor I had learned to wear like armor. "What are you doing here?" "I need help," she said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't know where else to go. I looked at this young woman who had once been my daughter in every way that mattered, who had called me mommy until she was 12, who had been part of my heart for 15 years. The professional in me recognized someone in crisis. The woman in me recognized the child I had loved unconditionally. "Would you like to come up to my office?" I asked. "We can talk privately there." She nodded, and we rode the elevator in silence. I unlocked my office door and gestured for her to take a seat on the couch where I met with clients. I sat across from her in my therapist's chair, maintaining the physical and emotional distance that my training had taught me was necessary. "Tell me, what's going on?" I said gently. The story came out in broken pieces. Lucy had dropped out of college after 2 years, unable to focus on her studies. She had been struggling with depression and anxiety, feeling lost and directionless. She had moved in with a boyfriend who turned out to be controlling and emotionally abusive. When she finally found the courage to leave him, she had nowhere to go. "I went to Michael first," she said, wiping her nose with a tissue I had handed her. "But he's married now, and his wife doesn't want me staying with them. Sarah is living in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates. The twins are both struggling financially. None of them can help me, and I don't have anyone else." "What about friends, other family members?" I asked, though I knew the answer. David's family had never been close, and the children had always been somewhat isolated, relying primarily on each other and the nuclear family we had created. "There's no one," she confirmed. "I've been sleeping in my car for 3 days. I'm scared, and I don't know what to do." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the same protective instinct that had driven me to care for these children for 15 years. But I also felt something else, a wariness born of experience, a recognition that this conversation was fraught with emotional landmines. "Lucy, I'm sorry you're going through this," I said carefully, "but I need to understand why you came to me. 5 years ago, you and your siblings made it very clear that I wasn't part of your family anymore. You rejected me completely, refused to have any contact with me. What's changed?" She looked down at her hands, shame coloring her cheeks. "I know we hurt you. I know what we did was wrong. But you're the only person who ever really took care of me, who made me feel safe. When everything fell apart, you're the one I thought of." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. I've built a new life, found new purpose, created new relationships. I can't just step back into the role I used to play in your life." "I'm not asking you to," she said quickly. "I just need help getting back on my feet. Maybe you could help me find a place to stay, or connect me with resources, or just give me advice about what to do next." I studied her face, seeing both the child I had loved and the young woman who had rejected me. She was in genuine crisis, that much was clear. But I also recognized the pattern, coming to me only when she needed something, only when everyone else had failed her.
Lucy, I want to help you, I said, but not as your former stepmother. I can help you as a professional, as someone who works with people in crisis. I can refer you to social services, help you find emergency housing, connect you with job training programs. But I can't be your mother figure again. That relationship ended when you chose to end it. She looked stricken. I understand that I hurt you. We all did. But can't you forgive me? Can't we try to rebuild what we had? Forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things, I explained. I forgave you and your siblings a long time ago. I had to, for my own peace of mind. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It doesn't mean pretending that the rejection didn't happen or that it didn't change me fundamentally.
But you loved me, she said, her voice breaking. You always said you'd love me no matter what. I did love you. I do love you. In the way that you love someone who was once central to your life but is no longer part of it. But love isn't enough to rebuild a relationship that was destroyed by choice. Trust has to be rebuilt, respect has to be reestablished, and both people have to want the same thing. I want that, she insisted. I want to be your daughter again. Do you? I asked. Or do you want someone to take care of you because you're in crisis? Because those are two very different things. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing my words. Finally, she looked up at me with something approaching honesty. I don't know, she admitted. I know I need help, and you're the person who always helped me before. I know I feel safe with you in a way I don't feel safe with anyone else. But I also know that I can't undo what we did to you. No, you can't, I agreed. And I can't undo the person I became after you did it. I'm not the woman who would sacrifice everything for children who might reject me again. I'm not the woman who would put someone else's needs ahead of my own well-being. I learned to value myself, to protect myself, to build a life that doesn't depend on other people's approval or affection. I'm proud of you for that, she said, and I was surprised by the sincerity in her voice. I read your book. I know about your practice, your marriage, everything you've accomplished. I'm proud of who you became, even though I know we're part of the reason you had to become someone different. The book was my way of making meaning from the pain, I said. It was my way of helping other people avoid the mistakes we all made. I know, and I'm sorry. We're all sorry, even if the others won't admit it. Michael regrets how he handled things, but he's too proud to say so. Sarah talks about you sometimes, about things you taught her. The twins ask about you when they think no one is listening. And yet, none of them have reached out, I observed. They're ashamed, Lucy said. We all are. We know we were wrong, but we don't know how to fix it, and we're scared that you hate us. I don't hate you, I said honestly. I don't hate any of you. But I also don't trust you. You showed me that your love was conditional, that it could be withdrawn when it became inconvenient. I can't put myself in a position to be hurt like that again. So what happens now? She asked. Now I help you as a professional, I said, reaching for my phone. I'm going to call a colleague who runs a transitional housing program for young women in crisis. She can get you into a safe place tonight and help you develop a plan for getting back on your feet. I'm also going to give you the number for a therapist who specializes in trauma and depression. You need professional help to work through whatever led you to the abusive relationship and the crisis you're in now. And that's it? She asked. That's all you can offer me? That's all I can offer you right now, I said. Maybe someday, when you've done the work to understand why you made the choices you made, when you've learned to take responsibility for your actions and their consequences, we can have a different conversation. But right now, this is what I can give you. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for helping me, even after everything we did to you. You didn't have to. No, I agreed, but helping people in crisis is who I am now. It's what I do. And you're in crisis, regardless of our history.
As I made the phone calls and arranged for Lucy's immediate needs to be met, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was sadness for the relationship we had lost, compassion for the young woman in crisis, and pride in the person I had become, someone who could help without sacrificing herself, who could show kindness without compromising her boundaries. When Lucy left that evening, safely connected to resources and support, I sat in my office for a long time, processing what had happened. The encounter had been painful, but also healing in its own way. It had shown me how much I had grown, how strong I had become, how clearly I could now see the difference between love and enabling, between helping and rescuing. I had loved Lucy and her siblings unconditionally for 15 years, and that love had nearly destroyed me when it wasn't returned. Now I could help Lucy without losing myself, could show compassion without sacrificing my well-being. It was a different kind of love, more mature, more boundaried, more sustainable. And while it might not have been what Lucy wanted, it was what I could offer, while still protecting the life I had built from the ashes of our broken family. The months following Lucy's visit brought unexpected developments that forced me to confront the complex legacy of my 15 years as a stepmother. Word had apparently spread among the siblings about
Our encounter, because over the next year, each of them reached out to me in their own way. Sarah was the next to make contact, sending me a carefully worded email asking if we could meet for coffee. Unlike Lucy's crisis-driven visit, Sarah's outreach seemed more thoughtful, more intentional. When we met at a quiet cafe downtown, she looked nervous but determined. "I've been in therapy," she said without preamble, "working through a lot of issues about family, attachment, grief. My therapist suggested I might benefit from talking to you about what happened after Dad died." I appreciated her directness. "What specifically do you want to talk about?" "I want to understand why we did what we did," she said, "and I want you to know that I understand now how wrong we were." Sarah explained that she had been struggling in her relationships, unable to trust or fully commit to anyone. Her therapist had helped her see that her pattern of pushing people away when they got too close stemmed from unresolved grief and guilt about how she had treated me. "I realized that you were the most consistent, loving presence in my life after Mom died," she said, tears in her eyes. "You never missed a school event, never forgot a birthday, never made me feel like I was a burden. And when Dad died, instead of leaning on you for support, we pushed you away because it was easier than dealing with our grief." "Why was it easier?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "Because you represented everything we were afraid of losing," she explained. "You were the one who held our family together, who made everything work. If we acknowledged how much we needed you, we'd have to face how scared we were of losing you too. It felt safer to reject you first." It was a more mature analysis than I had expected from the 26-year-old woman sitting across from me. "What changed? Why are you able to see this now?" "Therapy helped," she said, "but also I've been watching how you rebuild your life. I read your book, I've seen the work you're doing, I've heard about your marriage and your success. I realized that you didn't just survive what we did to you, you thrived, and that made me want to understand how." We talked for 2 hours, and while it was emotionally difficult, it was also healing. Sarah took full responsibility for her actions and their impact on me. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. She simply wanted me to know that she understood the magnitude of what they had done and that she was working to become a better person because of it. "I don't expect you to trust me again," she said as we prepared to leave. "I don't expect you to want a relationship with me. But I needed you to know that the love you gave me wasn't wasted. It's part of who I am, and I'm trying to honor it by treating other people the way you treated me." Michael's approach was different. He showed up at my office unannounced one evening, much as Lucy had, but his demeanor was more formal, more controlled.
He was clearly uncomfortable, but determined to say what he had come to say. "I owe you an apology," he said, standing stiffly in my office doorway. "What we did to you was inexcusable, and I was the ringleader. I convinced the others to shut you out, and I've regretted it every day since." I invited him to sit down, but he remained standing, as if he didn't feel he deserved the comfort of a chair. "I was angry," he continued, "angry at Dav for dying, angry at the world for being unfair, angry at myself for not being able to protect my siblings from losing another parent. You were the easiest target for that anger because you were there, because you cared, because hurting you felt like having some control over the situation." "And now?" I asked. "Now I understand that you were grieving too," he said. "You lost your husband, your family, your entire life because of our selfishness. And instead of supporting each other through the grief, we made everything worse." Michael told me about his own struggles, a failed marriage, difficulty maintaining relationships, a persistent sense of guilt that had affected every aspect of his life. He had finally sought counseling when his ex-wife told him that his inability to trust or accept love had destroyed their marriage. "She was right," he said. "I learned from you what unconditional love looked like, but then I threw it away when things got difficult. And ever since then, I've been afraid to let anyone love me that way again, because I know I'm capable of destroying it." "What do you want from me, Michael?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, and I believed him.
I don't deserve anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I understand what we lost when we lost you. And I wanted you to know that the man I'm trying to become is based on the lessons you taught me, even if it took me years to appreciate them." The twins, Emma and Ethan, reached out together, which somehow seemed fitting for the pair who had always done everything in tandem. They asked if they could take me to lunch, and when we met, they were clearly nervous but united in their purpose. "We've been talking about this for months," Emma said, "trying to figure out how to approach you, what to say, whether we had any right to contact you at all. We decided we probably don't have the right," Ethan added, "but we needed to try anyway." They were both 27 now, and I could see echoes of the children they had been in their adult faces. Emma had always been the more emotional of the two, and she cried as she spoke about the guilt she had carried for years. Ethan was more analytical, trying to understand the psychology behind their actions and the long-term consequences. "We were kids," Emma said. "Not little kids, but still kids. We didn't understand what we were doing or how permanent it would be. But being kids doesn't excuse it," Ethan added quickly. "We were old enough to know better, old enough to understand that actions have consequences." They told me about their lives. Emma was a social worker, inspired partly by my example of helping families in crisis. Ethan was an engineer like his father, but he also volunteered with Big Brothers Big Sisters, mentoring children who needed stable adult figures in their lives. "We're both trying to give back," Emma explained, "to make up for the damage we did, not just to you, but to ourselves and each other." "You can't make up for the past," I told them gently. "You can only learn from it and do better going forward." "Is that what you did?" Ethan asked. "Learned from it and did better?" "I tried to," I said. "I tried to understand what happened, to take responsibility for my part in it, and to use the experience to help other people avoid similar pain." "Your part?" Emma asked, confused. "What was your part? You were nothing but loving and supportive." "My part was in not setting better boundaries," I explained, "in giving so much of myself that I lost sight of who I was as an individual, in making my entire identity dependent on being needed by all of you. That wasn't healthy for me, and it wasn't healthy for you either." This seemed to surprise them. They had expected me to blame them entirely, not to acknowledge any role in the dysfunction that had developed. "We never thought about it that way," Ethan said. "Most people don't," I replied.
It's easier to see relationships in terms of victims and villains, but the truth is usually more complicated. I enabled some unhealthy patterns by not maintaining my own sense of self. You took advantage of those patterns when grief made you lash out. We all played a part in what happened. As these conversations with my former stepchildren continued over the course of a year, I found myself processing emotions I thought I had fully resolved. The encounters were healing in some ways, painful in others, and always complex. I shared these experiences with Robert, who listened with the patience and wisdom that had drawn me to him in the first place. He helped me see that these encounters were actually a gift, not because they might lead to reconciliation, but because they confirmed how much I had grown and changed. 5 years ago, these conversations would have destroyed you, he observed. You would have either been so angry you couldn't function, or so hopeful for reconciliation that you would have compromised your boundaries. Now, you're able to engage with them as equals, to show compassion without losing yourself. He was right. I could see my former stepchildren clearly now, as flawed human beings who had made terrible choices but were trying to learn from them. I could feel compassion for their struggles without taking responsibility for fixing them. I could acknowledge the love we had shared without pretending that love was enough to rebuild what had been broken. The final piece of the circle came when all 5 siblings asked if they could meet with me together. It was an unusual request, and I considered it carefully before agreeing. We met in a neutral location, a conference room at the community center where I sometimes held support groups. They had clearly planned what they wanted to say, and Michael, as the oldest, spoke for the group. We wanted to meet with you together because what we did to you, we did as a family, he said. We made a collective decision to shut you out, and we want to take collective responsibility for that decision. We've all been working on ourselves individually, Sarah added, but we realized that we also needed to face what we did as a group. They had prepared a letter, which Lucy read aloud. It was a comprehensive apology that acknowledged the specific ways they had hurt me, took responsibility for their actions, and expressed genuine remorse for the pain they had caused. It was clear that they had put considerable thought and effort into crafting it. "We don't expect forgiveness," Emma said when Lucy finished reading. "We don't expect reconciliation. We just needed you to know that we understand what we did and that we're sorry." "We also wanted you to know," Ethan added, "that the love you gave us wasn't wasted. It's part of who we are, and we're trying to honor it by being better people." I sat quietly for a moment, taking in the scene. 5 adults who had once been my children, now taking responsibility for choices they had made as young people dealing with grief and fear. It was more than I had ever expected, more than I had dared to hope for during the darkest days of my rejection and rebuilding. "Thank you," I said finally, "for taking the time to understand what happened, for doing the work to become better people, for having the courage to face me with your apologies. It means more than you know." "Does it change anything?" Lucy asked hopefully. "It changes everything and nothing," I replied honestly. "It changes my understanding of who you are now, my sense of closure about what happened, my hope for your futures. But it doesn't change the fact that I've built a new life, that I've learned to protect myself, that I can't go back to being the person I was before." "We understand," Michael said. "We just wanted you to know that we see you now, what you gave us, what you sacrificed for us, what you've accomplished since we lost you. And we're proud of you, even though we don't have the right to be." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me full circle. I had started as a young woman, eager to love and be loved, willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to be a mother. I had been broken by rejection, rebuilt through determination, and now I was whole in a way I had never been before. The relationships with my former stepchildren would never be what they once were, but they didn't need to be.
We had all grown and changed, learned hard lessons about love and loss, responsibility and forgiveness. We could acknowledge our shared history with honesty and compassion, even if we couldn't share a future. I had come full circle, but to a much better place than where I had started. I was no longer the woman who needed to be needed, who defined herself through others' approval, who gave without boundaries or limits. I was a woman who knew her own worth, who could love without losing herself, who had transformed her deepest pain into her greatest purpose. The circle was complete, and I was finally truly free. As I sit in my office today, 10 years after that devastating day when 5 young people I had raised as my own told me I had no right to be in their lives, I am struck by the incredible journey that brought me to this moment. The woman who packed her bags and left that house in tears could never have imagined the life I have built, the person I have become, or the peace I have found. My practice continues to thrive, and I have expanded it to include a training program for other therapists who work with blended families. I speak regularly at conferences around the country, sharing my story and the insights I have gained about love, loss, and resilience. My second book, focused specifically on helping step-parents navigate rejection and rebuild their lives, will be published next month. Robert and I recently celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary, and our relationship continues to be a source of joy and strength. We have built a life together based on mutual respect, shared values, and the deep appreciation that comes from having both experienced profound loss and found love again. His children have become dear friends, and their children call me Grandma Rachel with genuine affection. I have also become a licensed foster parent, providing temporary homes for children in crisis. Over the past 3 years, I have cared for 12 children, ranging from infants to teenagers. Some stayed for a few weeks, others for several months. Each one taught me something new about resilience, about the capacity of the human heart to heal, about the power of unconditional love. One of my foster children, a 15-year-old girl named Maria who had been in the system for 6 years, recently asked if she could stay with me permanently. Her request to be adopted was approved last month, and she will officially become my daughter next week. She understands that I am not trying to